Breaking news from across the African continent, we're witnessing something unprecedented. Black Americans are visiting Africa in record numbers, and it's thus reshaping identity, politics, and economic relationships across 3 continents. Welcome back to the channel, family. Today we're diving deep into a phenomenon that is making headlines from Accra to Cape Town. Over the past 5 years, Black American travel to Africa has increased by over 300%. But this isn't just tourism, this is something much more profound. I am talking about cultural reconnection, economic investment, and political awakening that is reshaping how we think about the African diaspora. So what is driving this massive movement? And what does it mean for Africa's future? Let us break it down. Like this video, help more Africans see this story. To understand what is happening today, we need to go back to the beginning. The transatlantic slave trade forcibly removed an estimated 12.5 million Africans from their homeland between the 16th and 19th centuries. 12.5 million. For centuries, this severed connection left millions of descendants scattered across the Americas, disconnected from their ancestral roots. But here is what is fascinating, this isn't the first wave of return. In the 1800s, we saw the establishment of Liberia and Sierra Leone as settlements for freed slaves. Marcus Garvey's Back to Africa movement in the 1920s mobilized millions. Even W.E.B. Du Bois eventually moved to Ghana, where he spent his final years. But what we're seeing now is different. This isn't about permanent relocation for most people. It's about reconnection, understanding, and building bridges. It is about healing. The roots of today's movement can be traced to several factors. First, DNA testing technology. Companies like 23andMe and AncestryDNA have allowed millions of Black Americans to trace their origins to specific regions and even ethnic groups in Africa. Second, social media has made Africa more accessible than ever before. Young Africans are showcasing their country's beauty, culture, and opportunities on platforms like Instagram and TikTok. Third, and this is crucial, Africa's economic rise. The Africa we see today is not the Africa of charity campaigns and pity narratives. We're talking about the world's fastest growing consumer market, with a GDP of over $2.6 trillion. Countries like Rwanda, Ghana, and Botswana have become investment destinations, not aid recipients. And Black Americans are taking notice. Now let's talk numbers, because the data is staggering. According to the African Tourism Board, Black American visits to Africa increased from roughly 200,000 annually in 2018 to over 600,000 in 2023. That is a 300% increase in just 5 years. Ghana alone saw over 200,000 African American visitors during its Year of Return campaign in 2019. But here is what is really interesting, the economic impact. Black American tourists spend an average of $4,000 per trip to Africa, compared to the global average of $2,500. They stay longer, they explore more, and they come back. Repeat visitation rates among Black Americans to Africa are 60% higher than other international visitors. Countries are starting to pay attention. Ghana's Year of Return generated over $1.9 billion in tourism revenue. Rwanda launched its own The Throne campaign specifically targeting the African diaspora. Nigeria introduced the Diaspora Visa program. But this movement goes beyond tourism. We're seeing Black Americans investing in African businesses, buying property, and even relocating permanently. The African diaspora represents a potential market of over $200 billion in purchasing power. Subscribe for honest, Pan-African analysis you want to find on CNN or BBC. So who is driving this movement? Let's break down the key players. First, you have the government. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has been the most vocal, literally inviting Black Americans to come home. His government introduced the right of abode law, allowing people of African descent to stay indefinitely without a visa. This isn't just symbolism, it's policy. Rwanda's Paul Kagame has positioned his country as the Singapore of Africa, actively cutting diaspora investment and expertise. Then you have the influencers and celebrities. When Beyonce shot her Black is King visual album across Africa, it wasn't just entertainment. It was cultural diplomacy. Steve Harvey moved his talk show to Ghana. Ludacris became a Gabonese citizen. These aren't just publicity stunts, they are resetting trends. But the real drivers are everyday people. Young professionals tired of microaggressions and systemic racism in America. Entrepreneurs looking for new markets and opportunities. Families seeking to reconnect with their heritage and give their children a different narrative about their identity. The travel industry has responded too. We now have specialized tour companies focusing on heritage tourism, DNA tracing trips, and investment tours. Airlines have added direct routes from major American cities to African capitals. The infrastructure is being built to support this movement. But here's where it gets complex, because not everyone sees this as purely positive. Let us examine the different perspectives, because as always, the story has multiple sides. From the African perspective, many welcome this reconnection with open arms. Tanzania's tourism minister recently stated that diaspora tourism is, quote, helping us tell our own story, end quote. But there are also concerns about gentrification. In areas like Cotonou in Benin or Cape Coast in Ghana, rising property prices due to diaspora investment are pricing out local residents. Sound familiar? Some Africans also question whether Black Americans truly understand the complexity of African societies. Africa isn't one country, it has 54 diverse nations with over 3,000 ethnic groups and more than 2,000 languages. The romanticized vision of Africa that some visitors bring doesn't always match reality. From the Black American perspective, many describe their visit as transformative, seeing themselves as part of a global majority rather than a minority, experiencing countries run by people who look like them, understanding that poverty isn't inherent to Blackness. But there is also what scholars call return shock. The realization that despite genetic connections, cultural gaps exist after centuries of separation. Some Black Americans report feeling like outsiders in both America and Africa, caught between two worlds. Then there is the economic perspective. For Africa, diaspora engagement represents a massive opportunity. The African diaspora sends over $40 billion in remittances to Africa annually. That is more than all foreign aid combined. But critics argue that tourism and short-term visits aren't enough. Africa needs long-term investment, skills transfer, and sustained engagement, not just Instagram posts and feel-good stories. So what does this all mean for Africa's future? First, we're seeing the emergence of a truly global African identity. The lines between continental Africans and diaspora Africans are blurring in meaningful ways. This has political implications. The African Union has recognized the diaspora as its sixth region, giving it formal representation in continental affairs. Economically, we're looking at potential game-changing partnerships. Black American entrepreneurs bringing Silicon Valley expertise to Lagos. African innovators accessing American markets through diaspora networks. This is about building bridges, not just visiting tourist sites. But perhaps most importantly, this movement is reshaping narratives. For too long, the story of Africa has been told by outsiders. Now we're seeing Africans and the African diaspora collaborating to tell their own stories. The image of Africa as a continent of poverty and conflict is being challenged by young Africans showcasing innovation, culture, and opportunity. And Black Americans are amplifying these voices to global audiences. This could fundamentally change how the world sees Africa, and how Africa sees itself. However, we can't ignore the challenges. Visa processes remain complicated and expensive for most African countries. Infrastructure gaps still exist in many regions. And there is always the risk that this becomes a trend rather than a sustainable movement. But the momentum is undeniable. Major universities are launching African studies programs specifically for diaspora students. Investment funds focused on Africa diaspora partnerships are emerging. This isn't just a moment, it is a movement. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories that matter to our continent's future. Looking ahead, several trends are worth watching. First, the rise of what I call heritage entrepreneurs. Black Americans starting businesses that bridge African and American markets. Second, the potential for political influence. As more Black Americans connect with Africa, this could influence US-Africa policy in profound ways. Third, the cultural renaissance. We're already seeing African fashion, music, and food gaining mainstream popularity in America, driven partly by this reconnection. And fourth, the education revolution. More Black American students are choosing to study in Africa, bringing fresh perspectives while gaining global experience. The question is whether this movement will continue, is how it will evolve. Will it remain primarily cultural and touristic, or will it become a serious economic and political force? The early signs suggest the latter. We're witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in African diaspora relations. So that's where we stand today. A movement that started with individual curiosity about ancestry has become a continental phenomenon reshaping politics, economics, and identity across 3 continents. Check out this next video where we explore how African governments are competing for diaspora investment and what it means for continental integration. But I want to hear from you. Are you part of the African diaspora? Have you visited the continent or are you planning to? For my African viewers, what is your perspective on this growing reconnection? Comment your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going. Because these stories matter, and your voice matters in shaping Africa's narrative. Until next time, stay informed, stay proud, and keep pushing for the Africa we want to see.